Jeez, Muraviv Galer. My name is Brian Looney. You're very welcome to this evening's webinar on the County Development Plan. I work in the role of Head of Digital in Kerry County Council, so I'm delighted to be able to facilitate this webinar this evening. There's been some tremendous public interest in the webinar. I'm not going to spend too much time on the housekeeping rules, but I'll introduce tonight's speakers. We have with us Michael Scannell, who's the Director of Services in the Economic and Community Development area, which also includes planning. And we have Damien Ginty, who's our Senior Planner. The agenda we're going to run through tonight, I'll just go through some housekeeping slides. Then Michael will welcome members of the public to the webinar. Damien is going to introduce the plan and the process to the members of the public. And he's going to run through the first couple of chapters in relation to the County Development Plan. So he'll look at the chapters on climate change, core and settlement strategy and rural housing. Then Mike will run through some of the chapters in the plan on towns and villages, sustainable communities, housing for all, economic development, tourism and connectivity. Then we go back to Damien for 3 more chapters on the Gaeltacht, culture and heritage, on environment and on energy. And then we'll have an opportunity maybe to take some questions from you, from the people who are joining us this evening. I'll go through how you can engage with us in that regard. I would encourage you, if you have any questions that are material to maybe where you live or your own circumstances, that rather than do that through the webinar, that you engage with the planning development team after the webinar, and we'll give you some contact details in relation to that later on. And finally, we'll give you a quick run through how to actually make a submission to the development plan. We want you to have your say. This is a very important document, probably the most important document that we engage in public consultation on in terms of the development of the county and the future of the county. So we'd very much like people to engage with us and to use the online platform, which will make that task hopefully a little bit easier for you as well as for the council staff who are taking those submissions and comparing them against what's already in the plan draft and helping to prepare the manager's report and give feedback to the councillors who own this plan. So just in terms of the mix of people joining us today, I did a snapshot earlier on, and of the 170 odd people who registered at that stage, just over half are ordinary people, I suppose. They've identified themselves as residents in Kerry. That's great that we have that kind of public interest. We have a mix of people then who are developers, who are landowners or agents, public representatives, and people who are working in representing community groups or business organisations or working in a public body. So that's a great spread, and we're delighted to see that kind of a mix at today's webinar. Just in terms of the housekeeping rules, the only people who will be seen today are myself and the other panelists. You can't be seen. Likewise, you can't be heard. So only the panelists will have a microphone today. So if there's noise in the background, that's fine. You can let the webinar play away. You don't have to worry about any background noise. If you want to ask a question, there's a question pane which you can type your question into. We'll take those questions and we'll share them with Damien and Mike at the last part of the webinar. So if something comes up during the course of their presentation, use that question pane to seek clarification, particularly if it's around the process or some of the higher level elements of the plan. Put them into the question pane and we'll direct them to Damien and Mike later on. We'll try to minimise any personal information that's in those questions, and we keep a copy of all the questions that are typed in. And in some cases, we'll come back to you after the webinar with answers to your specific question. So the final thing, I suppose, the webinar is being recorded, and it'll be available if maybe you have to leave and come back, or you know people who might be interested in this evening's content. So it will be available, and we'll post details of that on our social media accounts and on our website. And finally, if you have any feedback in relation to the running of this event, that's very much welcome and appreciated. This type of engagement isn't just because of COVID, and we hope to continue to reach more people through these digital and online means for future consultations that we're running. At the end of the session then, finally, we'll have an opportunity for you to have a look at the consultation platform that we're using, and there will be an opportunity then to get details in relation to how to engage with the planning team. So I'm going to just end this slideshow now, and I'm going to pass you over to Mike Scannell, who will do the welcomes for this evening.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you're more than welcome to tonight's webinar. I hope that you find it useful, and I hope that it will help you to engage in the process. And I think that that's what the whole event and this evening is about is trying to help you to engage in the process so that you can influence how the county develops over the next 6-year period. The County Development Plan is a significant document that guides the proper planning and sustainable development of the county over a period. And while it doesn't stand on its own and it's influenced by national and regional policy, it is very much the local input into how we develop our own county. The plan, and Damien will go through in detail what's contained within the plan, but it's important that you can make your submissions so that you can influence and that you can get your opinion across as to how you feel that the county should develop into the future. The draft plan has been prepared by the planners and the executive within the county, and it has been amended subsequently by the elected members, and now it goes out on public display for the members of the public to have your input. It will come back in with those submissions. We will do a report on them, and the members then will again amend the plan according to how they feel that the proper planning and development of the county can be achieved, taking into account the submissions received both locally here and also from the national bodies, including the planning regulator, the regional assembly, and the national government, various departments. So look, I wish to thank you most sincerely for taking part in tonight's webinar, and I hope that it will enable you to be informed about the process and to subsequently engage fully with it. So at that, I'll hand you back to Brian and over to Damien for the start of the presentation.
Yeah, Damien, if I can ask you to introduce the plan and the chapters that you're going to cover, just make sure you can share your screen there.
Mike, thanks very much. Thank you very much, Brian. So over the couple of slides, I hope to give you an outline of the plan, just a brief outline of what is a development plan, the statutory process and where we are to date. And this first presentation, I hope to go through the chapters in relation to climate change, the core strategy, the settlement strategy, and rural housing. So a development plan, each local authority is statutorily obliged to prepare a development plan every 6 years. It's on a rolling 6-year cycle, and it sets out a land use framework to guide the future development of a county with a focus on the places where we live, the places we work, how we interact and move between these places while protecting our environment. It also contains a framework for infrastructural investment. It not only outlines the infrastructural investment priorities of the local authority, but it also indicates where allied state agencies should align with the vision for the local authority and where their infrastructural investments should take place in areas such as wastewater, roads, transportation, educational investment, etc. It also contains the policy basis and the framework for assessing development proposals, planning applications. And you'll often see whenever permission is granted or when permission is refused, you'll see reasons for granting permission or reasons for refusing permission, and they are generally tied back into the policy framework in the county development plan. The plan must be consistent with national policy, and by national policy we mean the National Planning Framework, which was adopted by the Oireachtas, the Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy, which was adopted by the Southern Regional Assembly, and the relevant ministerial guidelines that are issued under Section 28 of the Planning Act. And ministerial guidelines issued under Section 28, local authorities are obliged to comply with these guidelines in making decisions under the planning code, not just in relation to planning applications, but also in relation to areas, planning policy areas like the County Development Plan and the local area plans. The County Development Plan sits just below the Regional Spatial Economic Strategy in our plan hierarchy, our national planning hierarchy. We can see it there on the right hand side, but it also crucially informs our local area plans. We have 5 of them in Kerry, and they prepare a framework for each individual settlement with land use zoning strategies for the smaller settlements like Carseveen, Rathmore, Ballybunion, etc. So just the process to date, stage 1 is known as the pre-draft stage. This began in June 2020 with the publication of an issues paper. Over 200 submissions were received, and a report was presented on the submissions received, prepared on the submissions received and presented to the Council in March 2021. And following the consideration of that report, a direction was received from the elected members to prepare a draft plan. The preparation of the work to prepare that draft plan took place from March to the autumn of this year. And that plan was presented to the elected members for their consideration in September and October, and it was adopted by the members with modifications at a meeting of the Council on the 22nd and 23rd of November. And we're now at the stage where this plan is on public display. It's on display for 11 weeks, and it's now over to you, the public, really, to have your say on what the plan contains, or what the plan doesn't contain, or what it should contain. Following the close of the public consultation period on the 23rd of February, again, the executive here, the planning department, will collate and assess all of those submissions, summarise the issues raised, and prepare a report for the consideration of our elected members to be presented sometime in April or May of this year. At that stage, it's up to the members then what changes they wish to make to the draft plan, and those changes, if what we call material in nature, if they're significant, will go on public display for a further 4 weeks, and thereafter a final report is prepared for the consideration of the members. It will only address those material alterations that went to public display, and thereafter it's up to the members whether they wish to finally make the plan, and we estimate that will occur by Q3 of this year. Just the structure of the plan. People think the county development plan is a single document of 100, 200 pages. It's actually a huge document, and if you go to the website there, and Brian will go through it at the end of this presentation, it'll give you a flavour on the actual size of the plan. It consists of 6 volumes. Volume 1 is the written statement, and that's where really most of the policy is contained. There are 14 chapters, and we'll go through the 14 chapters tonight. We've got our core settlement strategy. Chapter 4 is our towns and villages. 5 is rural housing. 7 is housing for all. Chapter 11 relates to the environment and landscapes. 12 energy, and the final chapter is connectivity. But we'll go through them tonight. I don't propose to go through and list each chapter at this stage of the evening. Volume 1 Appendices is the supporting documentation in relation to certain areas of plan, critical areas of the plan that require detailed analysis and research. So, for example, it contains our wind zoning methodology, the assessment and the process by which we arrived at those 3 wind zoning areas, the areas open to consideration, our repowering areas, and areas which are normally not considered suitable for wind energy development. It also contains our landscape review, which is a detailed assessment of the entire county and the landscape of the county to identify landscapes that should be protected from inappropriate development, but also protected views. And there has been a significant change really in the rural area in the context of tourism, and views that need to be protected, particularly along coastal areas with the advent of, for example, new tourist routes like the Wild Atlantic Way. So we looked at our entire landscape afresh, with a view to designating those sensitive landscapes and those protected views. And that analysis and methodology is also outlined in Volume 1 Appendices. And finally, we have a very detailed analysis in relation to rural areas, the density of development, where development has taken place of residential nature, commuting patterns, etc., in order to formulate our rural housing policy. And the methodology that was used to derive those 3 rural area types is also outlined in Volume 1 Appendices. Volume 2 is our 3 town development plans. The 3 towns of Tralee, Killarney and Listowel were formerly town councils, and they were planning authorities in their own right up until 2014. So we now need to deal with those 3 old town development plans, and we need to bring them in to the current county development plan. There was a significant amount of work done by our elected members and the executive here in relation to variations to those 3 town development plans in 2018 and 2019. They're largely left untouched. The zoning strategies remain largely untouched, and they've been brought in here into the county development plan into Volume 2 for legislative reasons. And following the adoption of the county development plan, we will review the planning policy frameworks of those 3 towns in conjunction with new local area plans. Volume 3 contains heritage-related matters and our public rights of way. Just in relation to rights of way, there is an obligation to list rights of way in the county development plan. It's not an exhaustive list, so the inclusion of a right of way in this volume does not mean it's a right of way, nor does the exclusion of a particular right of way from the development plan means that a right of way does not exist. In essence, it's to be viewed as a tourism brochure, so to speak, but it is a legislative obligation, and they're contained in Volume 3. Also in Volume 3 is our archaeological landscapes, our record of protected structures. There were 4 records of protected structures in the county heretofore with the 3 old town development plans. They've been now collated and put into a single volume here in Volume 3, and it also contains our architectural conservation areas. Volume 4 is our A3 document. It contains all of the maps that I spoke about earlier on, our rural area types, our protected landscapes, and our wind zoning areas. Volume 4 is actually the largest volume. Volume 5 is our largest volume. Actually, it's twice the size of Volume 1. It contains the environmental reports. our strategic environmental assessment, an appropriate assessment on an assured impact report, and our strategic flood risk assessment, which we're obliged to do under the ministerial guidelines. Volume 6, the final volume, contains our development management standards, and this gives a bit of guidance to the various architects and engineers and entities that may be designing or potentially lodging planning applications in the county. It contains our land use zoning matrix, which gives the same people and members of the public an idea of what development types may be permitted in principle or open to consideration on different land use zonings. It also contains our biodiversity action plan, our housing need demand assessment, and our housing strategy, which we're obliged to do under Part 5 of the Act in order to inform the delivery of social and affordable housing over the lifetime of the plan. So the next few slides, I'll go through climate change, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, our core strategy, and Chapter 5, policy in relation to rural housing. So we know that the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Act 2021 places us on a legally binding path to achieve net zero emissions by 2051, but also 51% reduction by 2030, and local authorities are required to prepare climate action plans, and our development plans must align with these climate action plans. Now, our own climate adaptation strategy was adopted in 2019, and there were various commitments on land use and development and drainage and flood management in that adaptation strategy, and those have been incorporated into this draft plan. But at its core, what we seek to do in the county development plan is to reduce carbon emissions by encouraging compact growth of our settlements, and that's derived from national policy contained in the National Planning Framework, by reusing brownfield sites, infill lands, to try and reduce resource use and car dependency, and crucially to encourage alternative modes of transport, including walking and cycling. And it's not really achievable to encourage people to walk and to cycle if we don't look at infill sites, brownfield sites, and compact our settlements, because walking and cycling will become difficult unless we have an overarching strategy in order to achieve that. The plan also contains a number of mitigation measures, including integrating land use and transport, delivering compact growth, promoting energy efficiency, and that's contained under development management guidelines, enhancing, protecting biodiversity, and also delivering the concept of a 10-minute town, whereby you're within 10 minutes of most facilities and services by walking or cycling. And again, that's allied to infill, brownfield development and increasing densities. And when we say increasing densities, we don't necessarily mean increasing densities, but we mean restoring densities and trying to put a population back into the core of some of our settlements, because we know that the core of a lot of our settlements has suffered an element of thinning out or depopulation in recent years, and we've seen a significant quantum of development on the fringes of our settlements. And some of the adaptation measures that are highlighted in the plan include the promotion of nature-based systems for water management services, less of a reliance on simply conveying stormwater and stormwater runoff directly into watercourses. We need to try and restrict future development sites to their greenfield runoff rate, and to promote climate action through quality design and placemaking on public realm, for example, through shade, shelter, provision of EV charging points, putting the person at the core of residential design and development, as opposed to the car and other forms of transportation. So we are obliged under the Act to identify a hierarchy of settlements in the county, and Tralee and Killarney are designated as key towns in the regional spatial and economic strategy. So they sit at the apex of our settlement hierarchy, and the position of the remaining settlements in the county have regard to not just the population of the settlement, but also the employment levels and the level of services in the settlement, and in particular its geographical influence in a sub-regional context. If we just focused on population, look at Carsaveen and Milltown by way of example, two settlements with a similar population, yet Carsaveen has a significantly higher level and range of services and facilities, but crucially it has a greater influence in a sub-regional context within the county. It provides services and facilities to a significantly greater hinterland than, for example, Milltown or another settlement of a similar population. In relation to the remaining settlements and their position in the hierarchy, we've also looked at infrastructure and planned infrastructure and the appropriateness of that settlement to accommodate future growth. There are in fact 89 settlements in the county, and these are listed in the settlement hierarchy. And for the first time, we've gone down to the level of small village settlements, and I'll come to the reason behind that when we come to the section on rural housing. But there are a total of 89 settlements listed in the settlement hierarchy. So this is our settlement hierarchy. On the left-hand side, we can see the key towns of Tralee and Killarney, sit there at the apex. They're given to us by the RESIS, the Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy. We can see there the next level is our regional towns: Ballybunion, Carsaveen, Castleisland, Dingle, Kenmare, Cloughlin, Listowel and Milltown. Then we move down to our district towns, our villages, and then finally our small village settlements there in the white box on the left-hand side. This map here on the right-hand side gives an idea of the spatial distribution of these 89 settlements throughout the county, and we can see here that there's a very good geographical spread of the settlements. There are very few areas of the county that aren't within close proximity to some settlement or some small village settlements. And the gaps that exist on the map, they're really the mountainous areas of the two peninsulas and the Stacks Mountains just northwest of Tralee. So we can see there's a very good geographical spread of nodes and settlements throughout the county. In terms of population, the National Planning Framework Implementation Roadmap and the Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy estimates that the population of the county will grow by between 166,500 and 170,500 people by 2031. And when we adjust that figure for the duration of the plan up to 2028, we anticipate that there'll be an additional 9,300 people living in the county. Now, we have been given a circular letter in relation to what is known as housing supply, because just because you have 9,300 people doesn't mean you have 9,000 dwelling units or requirement of 9,000 dwelling units. So we had to undertake an analysis looking at and incorporating a range of ESRI data. But as a result of that analysis, we estimate that there'll be a demand out of that 9,200 people for approximately 7,000 households. And this trend is reflective throughout the county, our country, because we know moving into the future that we will require a greater number of smaller residential units, 1-2 bed units. So we'll have a greater number of households, but with less people in them. So we take that population allocation of 9,300 or those 7,000 additional housing units, and we distribute it out amongst our settlement hierarchy. And we know that the Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy has designated Tralee and Killarney to grow by 40%. So a significant portion of that population increase is allocated initially to Tralee and Killarney. And the remaining population growth target or housing target is distributed out to the remaining settlements on the settlement hierarchy, having regard to their position in the hierarchy, but also the scale of employment, provision, jobs, net commuting flows, again, the extent of local services and facilities, and again, the influence of that settlement in a sub-regional geographical context within the county. So the population distribution is of crucial importance because that actually informs the quantum of residentially zoned land throughout the county. So it informs that quantum in volume 2 for Tralee, Killarney and Listowel, but it'll also inform the quantum of residentially zoned land in the forthcoming local area plans. So the plan hierarchy must be consistent. And we must remain within the parameters of population growth, 9,300, 7,000. And if we start to move population or increase population in one settlement, well, then we must simply take it from another. So moving on to rural areas, I think we're all agreed that rural areas hold much of our natural resources, scenic landscapes, and they do contribute in a unique way to the county's culture and a way of life. The 2016 census recorded that over 50% of the population of the county actually resided in the rural area, and that's outside of any of the key towns, regional towns, district towns, villages, outside of any of those 89 settlements in the county. And we also did a bit of analysis in terms of where we've been building over the last few years, and we know that between 2015 and 2020, there were over 1,800 new addresses in the county, but approximately 60% of these, 59%, took place outside of any of our major settlements, any of those 89 settlements, and consist primarily of private housing, whereas a significant proportion of development that has been occurring in recent years comprises of social housing. And this can lead to a spatial and a social imbalance, and Kerry is not unique in this area. The National Planning Framework actually highlighted this, and this is a trend nationally where a significant proportion of private housing occurs out in the rural area outside of our settlements, but yet a lot of the development that has happened in recent years within our settlements comprises of social housing, either by direct local authority build or by approved housing body. So we have had this process of population stagnation and population decline in some of our smaller settlements over the past few years. This unfortunately has led to a loss of services and facilities, has led to an increase in car dependency. We can see that particularly at peak times in our major towns and employment centres, in our key towns and our large towns, at peak times as people commute to work or education, particularly in the morning. And this continuation, the continuation on this path will lead to demand for car accessible facilities and services and facilities on the boundary of our settlements, a so-called donut effect, and will continue to mitigate our ability to achieve our climate change targets. So looking into the future of the lifetime of this plan and beyond, it's essential that we strike a balance between, on the one hand, facilitating people with a genuine economic or social need to live in the rural area, while ensuring that other housing demand is facilitated and encouraged in smaller towns and villages. And we talk about restoring density, we're actually talking about restoring population, because there were significant numbers of people living in our towns and villages historically. The Sustainable Rural Housing Guidelines, which we must adhere to, place an obligation on us to undertake research to identify rural area types. And as part of that, we must ascertain where development is taking place, where people are living, and what kind of commuting patterns exist into our larger settlements and our employment centres. This map on the right hand side actually shows where we're living in the county, and we can see here that there are significant numbers of housing along the road network radiating out of all of our major settlements. And if one was to take an aerial photograph of the county at 20 or 30,000 feet or even higher, it would be actually very difficult in a lot of cases to actually pick out where our settlements actually are, having regard to the numbers of housing that exist outside of our settlements. So in undertaking our analysis in accordance with those 2005 guidelines, we extrapolated a range of CSO data at 1 kilometre grid cell level, including the population of the county by 1 kilometre of grid, the population aged over 65, its location, the economic dependency ratio, the location of rural orientated employment such as agriculture, forestry and fishing, recent house construction, housing density per kilometre length of road, and in particular the level of car-based commuting into our larger settlements. Just by way of example, I just want to show you two maps in relation to those outputs. The map on the left-hand side shows recent house construction between 2000 and 2016. And we can see there, and this is done at 1 kilometre grid cell level, we can see there are significant dark areas outside of Tralee, Killarney, Listowel, Killorglin. And if we look at the map on the right-hand side, this is the level of housing density per kilometre of road. In the dark areas there, we can see there are up to 45 to 50 residential units per kilometre on some of our rural road networks. So that's a significant level of rural housing density, and that's a significant level of car dependency. Finally, this map illustrates the level of car-based commuting into our settlements, our key towns and our regional towns. And we can see there that out in the rural area, particularly in the periphery of some of our larger settlements, and between the towns of Tralee, Killorglin and Castleisland, we can see there are significant numbers of car-based commuters into our settlements every day. So this data was populated into a GIS. It was weighted, and it gave us 3 rural area types. The dark green is our rural areas under significant urban influence. The middle green is our rural areas under urban influence, and the lightest green is our areas, our other rural areas. And just for the purpose of information, we showed in white dots the location of some of the settlements within the county. So our chapter on rural housing, which is chapter 5, contains an individual policy framework to guide planning applications for rural houses in each one of those green areas. So in areas under significant urban influence and areas under urban influence, while there is a mapping difference and while there is a difference between the density of development and car-based commuting in these areas, the policy framework remains the same. So in essence, farmers, including their sons and daughters, persons taking over the ownership and running of a farm, persons working full-time in farming or the marine sector for a period of over 7 years in the local rural area, landowners including their sons and daughters, and persons who spent a substantial period of their lives in the rural area may be favourably considered for dwelling in the rural area, subject to other normal planning criteria in relation to wastewater treatment, roads, design, siting, density of development, etc. It just must be noted that there is no policy difference between these two areas, and that this is a matter that the planning regulator and the minister and the various other statutory agencies will comment on, and we will await to see what the OPR and the minister have to say in relation to our rural housing policy and the similar policy that exists between both these areas. In relation to our other rural areas, these are peripheral areas, areas with significant and demonstrable population decline. And it is the policy under this plan to accommodate demand for permanent place of residence, not holiday homes, permanent places of residence in these areas subject to normal planning criteria. It is the policy of this plan to strengthen rural small towns and villages because we believe they are the focal point of rural communities, schools, services and facilities. Many of the 89 settlements have an adequate form of wastewater treatment. Some have a form of wastewater treatment that does require an element of infrastructure investment, and it is an objective to facilitate and support Irish Water to deliver the required investment. The plan does support Irish Water's capital investment plan, but separate to that, as a local authority, we've made a detailed submission to a second capital scheme that Irish Water have, its Small Town and Villages Growth Programme, and we've highlighted a number of settlements that are outside Irish Water's capital programme that we feel are in need of investment to accommodate the future planned growth that this county development plan feels is needed. There are a number of settlements in the county that have no wastewater treatment and no plans for wastewater infrastructure. And as an alternative one-off housing, this plan will facilitate small clusters of housing served by individual wastewater treatment units consolidated around the core of these focal points or settlements. And these settlements are listed in the table on the right-hand side. Now, of course, remember that in considering applications for small-scale cluster developments, we will have regard to the existing size of the settlement, and what we envisage is that there will be small-scale clusters commensurate with the size of those individual settlements. So, Mike or Brian, back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Damien. Sorry, there's a bit of a lag with my computer there. Mike, I'm going to make you the presenter now for the next section of the presentation. And if you can share your slides with us, I'd appreciate that.
Moving on from Damien's presentation, and there will be some duplication between the themes, obviously, that both I and Damien speak of. And that's because, I suppose, while the chapters have titles of their own, there is a common themes running through the document. Obviously, climate change, sustainability, the whole concept of compact growth. These themes run throughout all the chapters within the plan. I suppose dealing with towns and villages, and this is directly leading on from Damien's point, I suppose there's national policy and regional policy at this stage all deal and look for the strengthening of our towns and villages. The National Planning Framework, the Regional Spatial Economic Strategy, the new Housing for All publications, and our rural future, they all speak about the necessity to strengthen both our major cities, towns, and also our rural villages. And part of that strengthening deals with compact growth and tackling the vacancy, dereliction, underutilization of property and land within our settlements. And there's a whole raft of legislation being developed around active land management, the introduction of the residential zoned land tax, the land value sharing and urban development zones. There's a lot of legislation being developed at present through finance bills and so forth to activate land and to encourage the development of housing and other development within our towns and villages. And the whole concept of using infill and brownfield sites that have become derelict and vacant over time. This is an important aspect in strengthening both our towns and villages. The whole concept then of town centre first policy and a town centre health check, and working with communities, with business within our towns and cities, trying to reactivate and develop a sense of place within these areas, and creating a balance between employment and population growth. Trying to have services, employment and residential areas in close proximity so that the level of travel can be reduced substantially. Town centre regeneration is central to the whole aspect, and the council here has been involved through the support of national funding streams supported by local funding in relation to the whole regeneration of our towns throughout the county. Obviously, people will see in Tralee the major redevelopments in the town centre. There are significant plans for redevelopment within Killarney, Carsavine, last week we got positive results in relation to redevelopments for Listowel and Killarglen, and there's plans being developed for all our towns and villages to create substantial redevelopment potential within these areas. Part of this whole process is the concept of placemaking, and it's important to make our towns and villages attractive. The urban design, built environment and the public realm, accessibility and mobility, sustainable travel, and there's a whole raft of developments being created around active travel and linking areas within our towns and villages to create sustainable travel opportunities for people, both walking and cycling, and making this an attractive option for commuters within our towns. It's important to create a sense of place and to develop healthy communities. And while the county development plan can help in relation to this, there's also other mechanisms, and the local economic and community plan, which is also being developed in the current year, that will deal with many of these aspects also. The creation of environment and green infrastructure within our towns and villages, the greening of our towns and villages, and creating green walkways throughout our towns, very important aspects of the whole redevelopment, and making our towns and villages destinations in their own right, to encourage people to come, to live and to visit these areas. And obviously then enterprise development to create employment opportunities for people. Damien spoke about residential densities and building heights, and these are detailed within the plan. And I suppose it is important that we do use the land that we have within our towns and villages adequately, that we do return, as Damien says, to the types of population that we had in our towns, centres and village centres over the past number of years. There certainly has been a loss of population in our town centre areas, where there was many mixed-use streets going back over the years, where business people lived over the shop and so forth. That element of residential living in town centres has been lost, and there's a need to recreate opportunities for residential development right in the core of our towns and villages. The whole creation of diversity of town centre uses, office, commercial, education and community use, the options of leisure and entertainment, the whole idea that the town doesn't close down at a given time, to create evening and late night uses so that people feel safe to walk and to commute within our towns and villages after dark. This whole outdoor dining is becoming a popular aspect of our developments in our towns and villages, and casual trading is also another opportunity for a different type of use within the towns. Towns and villages were always associated with retail, and while retail has changed dramatically over the years, we retain a retail hierarchy within the county development plan. And this is similar through the key towns, the regional towns, the district towns, villages and small village settlements. The county development plan outlines the level of retail that would be expected and would be supported within each of these three categories of towns. Obviously, the town centre retail vacancy is a huge issue throughout the county and throughout the country. And it is important that we look at those properties and see if they're not suitable, or if they're not demanded for retail development going forward, can an alternative use be made for them? A retail strategy is being developed as part of the development of the county development plan, and that will be produced over the coming months. There's a whole area about online shopping, and we know that particularly through the COVID period, that this has challenged the local retailers and the high street shopping, and particularly among the younger population who view online shopping as their primary way of doing business. So it's important that we support our local businesses, our local retailers, to have an online presence, that young people and all shoppers can avail of within the county. Tourism-related retail developments within our towns and villages are also very important, as they can be very positive in evening retail opportunities. The whole concept of retail warehousing and where they should be located, again, is an area that's outlined within the plan. Sustainable communities is at the heart of creating a positive location for development within the county. Dealing with climate action, as Damien pointed out, healthy communities, housing for sustainable communities, universal design, age-friendly communities, and towards a more diverse and inclusive county. Egan's wheel, that's shown on the slide here, gives an indication of all the aspects of life that create sustainable and that contribute to sustainable communities. And it's important that the county development plan and the local economic and community plan, as it's being developed, looks at these areas to create a positive atmosphere for communities within our towns and villages. Sustainable communities also require that the community infrastructure, services and facilities are easily accessible, that there are opportunities for sporting, leisure facilities, and that open spaces are available within our towns and villages to create opportunities for people to mix and to socialise. Libraries throughout our history have been very important, and throughout the COVID period, the online presence of libraries has also helped it has been extended. Health services, and we've seen a change in the way health services are delivered. There's a strong emphasis bringing health services within the communities, and we see the linking of health services with pharmacies, with all types of services in one building, and this is positive so that they can be located in town central areas and serve the community at the highest level. Education and lifelong learning. The county has been as fortunate in that the MTU has now established a university within the county, and this will obviously contribute also to the economic development and encourage young people to stay within the county and to develop careers from there. The county development plan looks for services for children and young people, services including playgrounds, sporting facilities and so forth. It also deals with places of worship, burial grounds, crematoria and fire stations. The county plan includes a chapter entitled Housing for All, and this chapter builds on the policies contained in the preceding chapters that set the overall settlement policy framework for the county, and specifically provides for the implementation of the objectives of Housing for All, the new housing plan for Ireland. And I suppose the areas covered within the Housing for All, a new housing plan for Ireland, include supporting home ownership and increasing affordability, eradicating homelessness, increasing social housing delivery and supporting social inclusion, increasing new housing supply and addressing vacancy and efficient use of existing stock. The objectives in Housing for All and the actions have recently been announced. The policies are being refined and are being developed, and these will be implemented through the publication of Section 28 guidelines and other amending regulatory provisions. The development plan at this point supports the implementation of the objectives of the Housing for All plan and will incorporate these policies as they are developed over the lifetime of the plan. The housing strategy and the housing needs demand assessment are also included in the plan, and these are mandatory objectives. The housing needs demand assessment deals with the existing and likely future need for housing for the purposes of the provision of social housing support and of housing for eligible households. Also, it deals with the need to ensure that housing is available for persons who have different levels of income, the need to ensure that a mixture of housing types and sizes is developed to reasonably match the requirements of different categories of households, as may be determined by the planning authority, and including the special requirements of older people and persons with disabilities. There's obviously been a dramatic change over the years from the demand from larger house types, and the major demand now is for 1 and 2 bedroomed units. There's also the needs assessment deals with the need to counteract undue segregation in housing between persons of different social backgrounds. The provision of good housing mix in all developments will be encouraged to ensure that residents may have access to a range of housing types and tenures. And it's important that people can stay within their communities as their lifelong needs change. In the area of economic development, the county plan is an enabler of economic development within the county. In the national and regional context, we have the National Development Plan, we have the Regional Economic and Spatial Strategy, the Southwest Regional Enterprise Plan, we have the Atlantic Economic Corridor, and the whole concept of this is to create within the county economic resilience, economic regions of regional economic significance. And nationally and regionally, 2 areas within the county have been designated as being regions of regional economic significance. And these are the Kerry Hub and Knowledge Triangle, and that's the area of the county incorporating Tralee, Killorglin, and Killarney, and also the Shannon Integrated Framework Plan, and that's the area involving surrounding the Shannon Estuary in North Kerry. And these 2 areas have been recognised nationally as having a significant regional economic growth potential. The designation of these 2 areas in no way lessens other areas within the county, but these 2 regions are seen as enablers for economic growth in the region, which support the surrounding areas and which can feed into development of these areas. As part of the economic challenge facing the county, an economic recovery plan has been developed between Kerry County Council and the various stakeholders within the county. These economic development, recovery and growth are based on a number of pillars. The first one was the Reopening Kerry programme, and this related to getting our streets and our towns and villages ready for reopening following the COVID lockdown. And then the major growth areas have been viewed as a transition to a low carbon economy, a transition to a digital economy, the regeneration of our towns and villages, tourism, culture, amenities and heritage, education and training, marketing Kerry, enterprise development and business support, our natural resources, and enhanced regional connectivity and infrastructure. And this economic recovery plan is appended to the county development plan, and within it are actions that have been designated by various agencies within the county to deliver over the coming years. And it's an important aspect of the economic development for Kerry. It's a plan that's not stagnant. It will be reviewed on an ongoing basis, and additional opportunities will be added to the plan as time goes on. I suppose the areas of promotion of the county, collaboration between the agencies are hugely important. Regeneration of our towns and villages, again, is key to the economic growth of the town. And employment, the creation of employment to support population across the county. And all this aspect of economic development and the marketing of the county is to ensure that that the county becomes an attractive place for both residents, for people who wish to work in the county, and for investment also. The council, along with the tourism agencies and the business entities within the town, within the county, Kerry SciTech and Kerry Tourism Industry Federation, are developing a county-wide portal in relation to working, visiting, and living within the county. And this will be an overall marketing policy for Kerry into the future. In the rural economy, our rural future, the Rural Development Policy 2021 to 2025, these are the policies that are contained within it and are supported within the county development plan. Optimising the opportunities for rural communities from high-speed broadband, supporting improved quality employment and career opportunities in rural areas, assisting the regeneration, repopulation and development of rural towns and villages, enhancing the participation, leadership and resilience of rural communities, enhancing public service in rural areas, supporting a just transition to a climate neutral economy, supporting the sustainability of agriculture, the marine and forestry, supporting the sustainability of our island and coastal communities, nurturing our culture and heritage. And these various policies have been expanded within the county development plan and given, I suppose, a Kerry touch in relation to how we wish the county to develop. But it's important that our policies within the plan reflect national priorities, because the funding opportunities and the drive across the various national and regional documents will support the development of projects within the county if we align them to national policy. I suppose the opportunities that have occurred through the COVID period has shown the economic potential of rural areas, the remote blended working and enterprise hubs. And there's been significant investment in hubs within the county, and that will continue. The home-based economic activity, agriculture, agri-food and agri-tech, the natural resources, the extractive industry, forestry, fishing, aquaculture and marine. They're all significant potential employers within the rural areas. Linking that employment in rural areas is the whole concept of our major industry, tourism, which contributes, I suppose, throughout the county, to all areas within the county. And there's great potential, and we see great potential within tourism to extend employment opportunities. It has been a very challenging time over the last 2 years for tourism in relation to the various lockdowns. The various sectors have suffered, I suppose, the most. And when we did our assessment, our economic assessment of the county at the beginning of the pandemic, Kerry was deemed to be the county that would be most impacted by I suppose, the close down and the lockdown of activity. However, the resilience of the tourism industry within the county has shown that over the last 2 summers, there's been very positive local support for the tourism industry in Kerry. And this has been particularly in relation that the county had been losing to some extent its popularity within the Irish tourism industry, while it was growing exponentially in relation to international tourism. For some time, that we were losing our status as being the #1 destination within the country for Irish tourism. The last 2 years has enabled that to change, and people have rediscovered the county. Our local people have rediscovered the county, but also other people from across the country have rediscovered the popularity and the beauty that Kerry has to offer. The County Development Plan supports sustainable tourism in recognition and association with climate action. The tourism policy is to adhere to the principles of sustainable tourism and to have regard to its current and future economic, social and environmental impacts on local infrastructure, sensitive areas and sites, water quality, biodiversity, soils, ecosystems, habitats and species, and climate change. And it's to look at undeveloped areas within the county, and the whole concept of the greenways, blueways, peatways and walkways, the diversification through niche markets, heritage and environmental tourism. We have our county tourism strategy and action plan 2016 to 2022, and that too is currently up for review. So we're in a positive position in that we will be aligning our county development plan, our local economic and community plan, and our tourism strategy over the period 2022. The visitor experience destination development plans and destination plans, the Wild Atlantic Way, all offer opportunities for marketing and promoting the county. The destination branding. The Kerry Tourism Industry Federation has done a great job this year in relation to, with support from Kerry County Council and Fault Ireland. They've done a great job in marketing the county in a very positive way, and we hope that will continue into 2022. The development of tourism infrastructure is very important. Transport links, bus services, and dealing with congestion in some of our major tourist routes. And there's work ongoing in relation to these aspects. Kerry Local Link Service and the Transport Infrastructure Ireland and the new routes that are being created. People will be aware that the routes created west of Dingle have been huge success. Information offices and cultural centres, visitor attractions, all-weather attractions, parking, coach parking. These are all aspects of the tourism infrastructure that need attention and are supported through the county development plan. The whole aspect of accessible tourism and wayfinding, linkages between tourism activities and business. And I suppose the whole area is to try to create, to extend the tourism season, to bring tourists to all areas of the county and to maximise the benefit in a sustainable manner. In relation to accommodation, I suppose the visitor accommodation, the location, the hotels, guest houses, B&Bs, glamping, camping, caravans and camper vans, farmhouse, farm stay accommodation, short-term lettings, which have become an issue in the county, derelict and vacant buildings, and how that they can be brought back and support tourism industry. So there is policies within the plan dealing with all these areas. So it's important that they would be viewed. The whole aspect of tourism and outdoor recreation is becoming hugely popular. Walking and cycling, water-based activities, forestry. These are all aspects of the county that have been developed and will continue to be developed through the support of the county development plan. Rural diversification is an important aspect which supports the rural economy through agri-tourism, health and well-being, food production, the culture and heritage, the heritage value of our towns and villages, the rural areas. And again, this brings us back to where we started in relation to placemaking, making our towns and villages attractive for people. And the benefit of doing this is that it supports tourism, but it also makes our towns and villages attractive for the people that live there. It makes our towns and villages attractive for business interests who wish to invest. The support to build infrastructure, heritage trails, and access to heritage sites. The whole arts, crafts and food tourism, dealing with vacant properties, providing outdoor performance spaces and public spaces. There was a time, I suppose, that we were considered that Kerry wasn't suitable, or Ireland wasn't suitable for outdoor performance space, it wasn't suitable for outdoor dining, wasn't suitable for all these outdoor activities because of the weather. But COVID has proved to a large extent that that isn't true. It does rain at times, but you can create opportunities to enhance the outdoor activities within the county. The whole concept of locally sourced food, drink, crafts, the authentic experience and marketing. And I think this is hugely important, that the authentic experience within the county is developed and supported. Business tourism, the Kerry Convention Bureau, the creation of business conferences. Again, this is an aspect of tourism which can extend the season and be very positive at off-season times. And it's an area that has obviously suffered during COVID, but there is huge potential over the coming years to redevelop that. And Kerry, as a rural location, can be very attractive for business tourism. The whole supporting of the niche tourism areas of the dark skies, film, photography, these are all areas that can be developed. In relation to, I suppose, the development of our towns and villages, water and waste management are critical. Water quality and water resources, the Water Framework Directive and the National River Basin Management Plan. Drinking water source protection, groundwater protection schemes, and these are all linked to how we develop our county, where we put the development, how we service it. Wastewater treatment systems and private wells, to ensure that the quality of our drinking water, the quality of our rivers, the quality of all our fresh and sea waters is to the highest standard. Development must be managed to ensure that. The whole aspect of water conservation, water infrastructure, the importance of wastewater infrastructure for the developments of the settlements. And I know within Kerry, there are challenges in areas that have been stagnated because of the absence of water infrastructure. The members of Kerry County Councils are constant advocates in relation to the securing of funding through Irish Water for the development of infrastructure that will allow our settlements to grow. And this is a challenge, and it's recognised in the plan that the wastewater treatment in rural areas is also a significant area. Stormwater management and the traditional, I suppose, mixed water systems within our towns that are being unwound over time. The implementation of waste management hierarchy, the greenhouse gas reduction targets, European and national policies such as the Landfill Directive and the National Biodegradable Waste Strategy is driving change. The implementation of regional waste management plans, these are all called out within the plan, as are the civic amenity sites and the bring bank areas, which are outlined in the map enclosed. The circular economy is an area that's been developed and being encouraged. The MTU here in Kerry are doing significant work in relation to this. There's a lot of collaboration between the tourism industry in relation to the circular economy and waste minimisation and food waste minimisation in particular. The policy is now focused on building a circular economy which recognises that all resources are scarce and aims to maintain the value of all products, materials and resources through reuse, renewal and repair, so that products are reused continually to minimise the generation of waste. The final area I deal with is connectivity. And this is the physical and digital connectivity within the county and the whole concept of sustainable transport. The National Investment Framework for Transport in Ireland, NIFTY, has a modal hierarchy and an intervention hierarchy. The active travel, public transport and private vehicles to maintain, optimise, improve, and at the lower end, new. We have to be conscious of where we're living in a rural county. We don't have the level of public transport that we require, but there is certainly an improvement through the extensification of the bus service network within the county and the opportunities created by the new transport plans. The whole area of decarbonisation, protection and renewal, the mobility of people and goods in urban areas, and the whole active travel management, the creating of cycleways, of walkways, and making it attractive both for people visiting town centres, for children going to school, for people going to their place of business, to travel in ways other than by the vehicle. It's also important that we have enhanced regional and rural connectivity. The county, and there are significant improvements in the road network. And this, okay, when we talk about decarbonisation, we also must remember that we need the road infrastructure linking the county to the major cities, to the cities within the region and within the country. These are significant highways that have to be developed and have to be protected. The whole aspect of active travel and greenways, and while the plan shows an indicative number of greenways, the whole greenway development has now been taken over by Transport Infrastructure Ireland, and as part of that we're currently developing an overall greenway strategy, and that strategy will be finalised in Q2 of the current year, and that will form part of the county development plan when it's complete. There's land use integration and local transport plans being developed throughout the country. The road investment priorities, as pointed out, and the protection of the efficiency, safety and carrying capacity of national routes. And this is important in relation to access to national routes. To minimise access to national routes is important to ensure their safety and their continuing carrying capacity. The whole concept of parking and signage within our towns and villages, servicing our amenity areas, servicing our beaches, and a parking policy is also being developed currently within the county to ensure that the county is capable of accepting and catering for the level of transport that visits us at high season. The whole public transport area to continue to support the rail network. We've spoken about the extension of the bus services and also the importance of Kerry Airport, but also the importance of the other regional airports within the area, including Shannon and Cork. Ports, harbours, piers, the access to long-term development, fishing, tourism, and the whole possibility of offshore renewable energy being part of the development into the future. As Damien already dealt with the public rights of way that are outlined within the plan. The digital economy, obviously of huge importance, and has become to the fore, particularly over the last 2 years, where we've, I suppose, tonight is an indication. If this was pre-COVID, we'd probably be on a tour of community halls around the county in relation to this development plan. The telecommunications and broadband, and there are areas that don't have the service that is required, but there are significant improvements already throughout the county in relation to broadband. The national broadband plan is being rolled out. It's not being rolled out as quickly as we would like. Currently, we're in the midst of the development of the Kerry digital strategy, which will also be completed in the current year. And that strategy will, I suppose, support the use and development of digital activity within the county and ensure that the county is in a place that it's ready to avail of the services that are being rolled out. The broadband connection points that are being developed throughout the county in the various communities areas, the metropolitan area networks, and the digital hubs and co-working spaces that we spoke about under the economic section, where there's possibility of people co-working in our towns and villages at these locations. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll hand you back to Brian. Thank you.
So I'm going to make Damien the presenter now, so if you just bear with me. Okay, Damien, you should be able to share your next presentation. You're going to deal with 3 more chapters that are in the development plan. So over to you.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Mike. Just finally, I'll just give you a brief insight into the final 3 chapters tonight. Chapters 8, the Gaeltacht Culture and Heritage, Chapter 11, Environment, and Chapter 12, Energy. And Chapter 12 also includes our revised policy in relation to wind energy development. So just beginning with the Gaeltacht, the plan does recognise the important role of the Gaeltacht in the linguistic and social cultural traditions of the county, and it is an objective of the plan to promote and develop the Gaeltacht as a centre of linguistic and cultural heritage and to encourage sustainable economic development in the Gaeltacht in order to ensure vibrant communities. We do recognise, and the plan does recognise, that without a community and without a sustainable economic community, then there simply won't be any linguistic community speaking the Irish language on a daily basis. The plan does recognise the need for sustainable economic development in order to ensure vibrant Gaeltacht communities. It's also an objective to enhance the unique cultural identity and to secure the sustainability of Gaeltacht communities into the future, and to encourage the provision and to support facilities for the ongoing teaching and learning of the Irish language. The plan, for the first time, contains an objective that multiple residential units, 3 or more units in the Gaeltacht area, shall be subject to linguistic and occupancy requirements in order to protect this linguistic heritage. So therefore, it's an objective under this plan that 66% of all housing developments on residentially zoned land within the Gaeltacht areas will be reserved for Irish speakers. And this will be implemented by way of a Section 47 agreement to be signed and sealed by both the developer and Kerry County Council. But that Section 47 agreement will actually specify specifically the individual units within the development that are to be reserved for Irish speakers. It is an objective as well of the plan to continue to work with and support Údarás na Gaeltachta and the Bhreathnaigh Interagency Task Force and their aims to preserve and strengthen the Irish language. And it's an objective to facilitate and support the ongoing good work being carried out by the Dingle Creativity and Innovation Hub, and also the GTEC network of hubs being developed by Údarás na Gaeltacht. In relation to archaeology, there are approximately 11,388 archaeological monuments within the county, and it's an objective of the plan to protect these and, where necessary, to insist on buffer zones around these monuments. The plan contains 19 archaeological landscapes. That's up from 18 in the 2015 to 2021 plan, with the additional archaeological landscape being Killatlahan outside Milltown, and that's reflective of the recent work carried out by Dr. Michael Connolly on the portal tombs in that area. Not only is it an objective of the plan to protect the actual setting of the monuments, but it's also an objective of the plan to protect the landscape setting of the monuments, including views to and from these areas, because historically these landscapes were chosen for either residential purposes or for ritual purposes because of their geographical location, and details and the listings of these monuments and landscapes are in volume 3. As I said earlier on, the record of protected structures is now in a single location, a single volume. Previous, there were 4 individual records of protected structures due to the former town councils being planning authorities in their own rights. So that record of protected structures is now listed in a single location in volume 3. There are 10 proposed additions to the record of protected structures, including 3 number 18th century dwellings, Phoenix and Tarbert lighthouses, single structure in the Gaeltacht, Braehead Watchtower, and for the first time in relation to military history, we have 2 number Second World War era coastal lookout posts proposed to be protected. Again, the architectural conservation areas are now consolidated in a single volume. There is a difference between a protected structure and an ACA. In a protected structure, every single element of the structure, including externally and internally, is protected. There is a mechanism under the Act known as the Section 47 Declaration, where we will actually specify on application to us as a local authority the individual elements of that structure that should be protected. An ACA, an architectural conservation area, is a slightly lower standard of protection, and that generally protects a group of buildings such as a streetscape or a group of buildings, because collectively as a group they are architecturally important, and we're generally looking at protecting the external facades of those buildings. And there are many examples of attractive streetscapes in some of our smaller towns and our settlements. There are 6 proposed additional architectural conservation areas, and they're all located in Killarney, and they're listed there on the slide. Okay, in relation to energy, well, the plan does support sustainable provision of a reliable energy supply within the county, with a particular emphasis on increasing energy supplies derived from renewable resources. And we are aware of the Climate Action Bill and the path that we are now on to reduce our climate emissions by up to 51% by 2030 and to net zero by 2050. It is an objective to facilitate a gas importation facility on the Tarbert-Ballylongford land bank and the expansion of the gas network. And it must be remembered that we see this as a transition fuel, not long-term dependency, but we need to ensure energy security on the one hand, and we also need to transition towards renewable energy over the coming years. It is an objective to support EirGrid's investment programme, but that's subject to landscape, residential amenity and environmental considerations in the consideration of any large-scale applications that EirGrid may make. EirGrid can also apply under the strategic infrastructure provisions of the Act directly to onboard Planola. It is an objective to promote energy conservation and efficiency to reduce consumption through reduced consumption, particularly in relation to building design and standards. And we do have elements of that incorporated into our development management standards in volume 6. And it is an objective to facilitate battery storage systems at or adjacent to existing energy infrastructure. It must be remembered, as we increase the level of energy resources from renewable sources, there is a need for backup battery storage, and this plan seeks to facilitate that type of storage at existing energy infrastructure locations. And by that we mean existing EirGrid substations. There are a number of those throughout the county, facilitating the 200 kV and 110 kV network. In relation to wind energy, well, it's very clear, and the plan is very clear in this regard, that Kerry has made a huge contribution towards realising national wind energy targets to date. And as of June, there were approximately 362 wind turbines constructed across the county, across 25 wind farms. And this incorporates approximately 742 megawatts of installed capacity. And it's worth noting that 18% of national wind energy installed capacity is located in Kerry, notwithstanding that the landmass of the county comprises 6.8% of the states, and the population of the county comprises merely 3.1% of the state. So Kerry's made a huge contribution towards national targets in relation to wind energy. However, we do have to have regard to national policy, and there are 4 documents there that we are obliged to take into account under ministerial guidelines issued under Section 28, and they are the National Renewable Energy Action Plan 2010, the Government's Strategy for Renewable Energy, the Government's White Paper on Energy Policy, and the Government's National Mitigation Plan. We also have the Draft Wind Energy Guidelines issued in 2019. And while we must have regard to guidelines issued under Section 28 by the Minister in formulating planning policy, we must comply with an SPPR, which is a specific planning policy requirement contained in those guidelines. And SPPR, one of those 29 guidelines, places an obligation on us to identify 3 areas. Areas for wind energy development will be acceptable in principle, open to consideration, and generally discouraged. So it's essential that we have a robust process in forming renewable energy policy. But we must also comply with national policy. And if we don't comply with national policy, there is a possible risk of an intervention by the Office of the Planning Regulator. So we need to have a logical, technical, proficient policy that can withstand challenge. In order to derive a renewable energy policy, and in particular to arrive at those 3 areas that we're obliged to identify, a very detailed analysis was carried out by the planning staff, and this is outlined and contained in volume 1 appendices, and I'll just give you a synopsis of the level of analysis that was undertaken. The analysis that we undertook involved five key steps. The first step was an analysis of wind speed in the position of the national grid, and the map there in the middle top of the slide highlights the location of the national grid in Kerry, and the red line is the 200 kV line running north to south from Tarbert down as far as the county bounds of Cork. And the blue lines are the 110 kV, 110,000 volt network, and that's running slightly to the west and again north-south. We also mapped the wind speeds within the county, and they're highlighted there on the map on the top right. The second step was an overlay mapping of wind energy constraints. So we had a look at where our lakes were, our settlements, the obstacle limit for the approaches to Kerry Airport, UNESCO World Heritage Sites, our archaeological landscapes, designated SPAs for the hen harrier. We looked at the freshwater pearl mussel catchments, the Water Framework Directive, and the Blue Dot Programme under the Water Framework Directive. We also looked at geotechnical issues, such as the location of peat soils, lands at particular risk of landslide, and geological heritage sites. And we overlay these on a GIS, and the resultant areas in green are considered unsuitable for wind energy developments, and the remaining areas for further detailed assessment are in white on that map. I'll come back to the areas of further assessment in a few minutes. Step 3, we undertook an analysis of the cumulative impact of installed wind energy developments to date and wind energy developments permitted and not yet constructed. In order to undertake this analysis, we utilised a zone of theoretical visibility, an STV analysis. And this is based on a digital elevational model, a DEM, where the location heights of existing and permitted turbines, including heights above sea level, were inputted into a GIS. We also included the wind turbines in adjacent counties, because there are a number of turbines in Limerick and Cork that are very close to the boundary of Kerry. Some of the given parameters were that the ZTV and the DEM measured the visible wind turbines at a height of 1.6 meters, that's the average human height, at a distance of 20 kilometers, which is considered the limits of human eyesight. The zone of theoretical visibility measured the blade tip height of each wind turbine in the county, not the hub height, the blade tip height, and the location of each wind turbine, including its height, was input into the GIS. So the output of that ZTV gave us areas where we felt that there are the pockets of the county which had achieved really their capacity to accommodate additional wind energy turbines. And the map on the left-hand side, you can see there were pockets of the county where up to 200 wind turbines were visible. So there are significant densities of renewable energy developments located in specific pockets of the county. So that map on the right-hand side gives us the output of that analysis. And these are areas where we consider that there is a significant cumulative impact in relation to installed and permitted but yet to be installed wind energy developments. The fourth step was a further assessment of those areas that remained as a result of that overlay mapping exercise. They were white in the previous map, they're coloured red here on the map on the left-hand side of the slide. And we grouped these areas into 25 geographical areas to analyse in detail the areas with respect to the infrastructure, the location of the population, and in particular the sensitivity of the landscape in each of these areas to renewable energy developments. The final step was the overlay of steps 1 to 4. Step 1 was the wind speeds and the grid infrastructure. It's simply unreasonable to designate areas for renewable energy development if we know that the grid infrastructure is not present. And similarly, it's unreasonable to designate areas suitable for wind energy development if we know that the wind speeds are not capable of generating wind energy developments. So we overlaid step 1, which was the wind speeds, the grid infrastructure. Step 2, the overlay mapping exercise of constraints. Step 3, our cumulative impact analysis and result of theoretical visibility. And step 4, the outputs of that detailed analysis of those 25 AFAs. The map on the right-hand side is the output of this analysis, and the areas in blue are the areas that are designated as being open to consideration for renewable energy developments. The areas in pink are the existing wind farms, and we are obliged to put together a planning policy framework to deal with existing wind farm developments that achieve their end of life. And the national grid there, the 400 kV and the 110 kV, is indicated on the map for reference purposes. The 2019 draft guidelines include a mandatory minimum separation distance of 500 meters from a residential dwelling or a sensitive receptor, or 4 times the blade tip height. So if the proposed wind turbine has a blade tip height of 150 meters, then the minimum separation distance increases to 600 meters. This analysis does not take into account those minimum separation distances. This analysis will be taken into account during the assessment of any planning applications that are lodged on these sites. It's worth pointing out that the 2015 to 2021 County Development Plan zoned 546 square kilometres as being open to consideration for wind energy development. This draft plan zones 59 kilometres square, and that is a 90% reduction in the areas that heretofore were open to consideration for wind energy developments. Applications outside of those 2 areas will not normally be considered, with the exception of a small-scale single turbine where the energy is used on site. So moving on to environment, the plan does recognise the importance of the environment, in particular ecology and biodiversity, and that biodiversity underpins and supports all of our activities. Over 40% of Kerry's landmass is within a designated habitat, either a special area of conservation under the Habitats Directive, or as a special protection area under the Birds Directive of 79. And the plan does seek to protect and conserve Natura 2000 sites, and they're mapped in detail in volume 4. And it is an objective of the plan to ensure that any developments either within these areas or functionally linked to these areas do not have an impact on the qualifying interests. The plan contains a biodiversity action plan in volume 6, and it contains objectives and actions to conserve, protect and enhance biodiversity ecosystem services in the county, and also to raise awareness, in particular to work with local community groups and stakeholders who have to date played a crucial role in raising awareness and working with the community in order to protect ecologically sensitive areas. It's the objective of the plan to support the Kerry Biosphere Reserve, and the Council are an active partner with National Parks and Wildlife Service in relation to this UNESCO designated site. And it's the objective of the plan to work with the NPWS and the Department of Heritage in the management of the buffer transition zones outside the core of the biosphere. And the core of the biosphere is the boundary of the national park. It's also an objective of the plan to ensure invasive species, such as Japanese knotweed, are managed in accordance with the EC Birds and Habitats Regulations 2011. And again, that can only be undertaken by working with stakeholders, community groups, and through raising increased awareness to prevent the spread of these species. The plan takes cognizance of the OPW CFRAM, that's the Catchment Floodless Assessment and Management Study, and the ICPSS, the Irish Coastal Protection Strategy Study flood risk maps. These 2 studies have for the first time identified in detail the flood risk in coastal areas and from fluvial, which is river, sources in the county and nationally. And there are a range of objectives and land use zones in the plan that have all had regard to the flood risk management guidelines, and the land use zonings within the plan have been assessed in accordance with the flood risk assessment. And in essence, it is an objective of the plan not to permit vulnerable developments in flood risk areas. It is also an objective to facilitate and support the flood risk capital works identified in the flood risk management plans arising from the CFRAM study. Moving on to landscape, I think we're all agreed that the landscapes of Kerry are one of its defining features. And it's not just a visual asset, but it's also an important economic asset, particularly to the more peripheral areas of the county. And they're not just places of natural beauty, but they do provide a real asset for residents and visitors for recreation and tourism purposes. If we look at the more peripheral areas of the county, and as Mike alluded to, it's tourism that is the most likely sector to deliver jobs in these rural, peripheral and peninsula areas. But the landscapes is also a major contributor to the quality of life that would underpin Kerry as a whole as a location for foreign direct investment and for inward investment. So the landscapes are a very, very important economic asset to the socio-economic development of the county. A detailed landscape review was undertaken of the county, and again that's undertaken in volume 1 appendices to identify landscapes that should be protected, visually sensitive landscapes and views and prospects that should be protected. The previous county development plan had 3 designations in relation to landscapes: areas of prime special amenity, areas of secondary special amenity and rural general areas. We undertook a fundamental review of landscapes within the county, and we now have a single designation, visually sensitive areas, and we have looked again at our views and prospects and reassessed those, particularly in light of new tourist routes such as the Wild Atlantic Way, and there are a number of additional views and prospects that are identified in the plan that should be protected. The landscape review consisted of 5 key steps. They're outlined there on that slide. In essence, we divided up the county into 40 areas for assessment, and they were assessed in relation to the context of the landscape scale, its landform, its land cover pattern, the built environment, the amenity values, and the landscape values. And the output of that assessment was landscapes and views that should be protected, and also views and prospects that should be protected. And for the first time, there are a significant number of landscapes in North Kerry and in East Kerry that have been identified as being particularly sensitive to development. And we're not talking about elevated landscapes. There are landscapes that are relatively flat and relatively low topography, but they are unspoilt in terms of development. And these have been identified and are protected in the plan. So we now have two designations in the county: visually sensitive areas and rural general areas. In the visually sensitive areas, development is not precluded. We need to be very, very clear about that. Development is not precluded or banned in these areas, but proposals in these areas must demonstrate that they integrate in relation to the landscape and respect the visual quality of the landscape. They must be sensitively designed and sited in order to avoid any negative impact, and they should be located adjacent to or as close as possible to existing structures or existing dwellings. They will be subject to a higher degree of assessment, and there's no presumption in favour of development. The landscape, as designated in the plan, is of primary importance. So that's it. Submissions in relation to the plan. The plan is available to view at consult.kerrycoco.ie or through the council's website, which will direct you to consult.kerrycoco.ie. Plans on public display until the 23rd of February, and submissions may be made through that portal or in writing. And individual queries in relation to any aspect of the plan can be emailed directly to the planning team here at plan@kerrycoco.ie or by phone to 066 718 3802. So I'll hand you back to Brian, and I think, Brian, you're going to give a demonstration at the end of this as to how one can make a submission.
Thank you very much, Damien, and thanks to everybody for sticking with us. We've had over 100 people consistently tuned in this evening, so it's great to see that kind of interest in a topic that sometimes might be a little bit inaccessible to people. There's a lot of obviously technical jargon, but I think Damien and Mike, to be fair to them, have done a very good job at breaking down what might be kind of technical planning language into things that we can maybe all understand. So my appreciation to them both in that regard, and to the clarity of their presentations. Just as a final kind of a wrap up, I'm just going to go very quickly to the site. Damien and Mike both alluded to it, so I'm just going to share the website. So this is the webpage, consult.kerrycoco.ie, and as Damien has said, you can get to it from the main Kerry County Council page if you can't remember the actual title, but it's straightforward enough, consult.kerrycoco.ie. And once you get here for your first visit, the first thing you'll have to do is register yourself as a new user. That gathers, I suppose, a minimal set of personal information that will allow you to basically record and have your submission made and appear in the manager's report. There's different user types that are identified. So if you are registering for the first time as an individual, you can register to make a submission on your own behalf. If you're registering on behalf of an organisation, you can go through a separate registration process. And if you're involved in planning and development as an agent or a professional planner, again, you can register under that development type. So registration is quite quick. Again, I just very quickly run through the type of information that's being sought. So just contact details, a username that you can use to log into the system, and your email address, some basic contact information. You set up a password. You give us consents so that we can engage with you in relation to this consultation and other consultations, and you create your account. And then once you have created your account, you can log into the portal to make your observations and your submissions. You've got a profile, then you can correct your user information if you need to. So if I just go back to the home page, because I've logged in now as a user, I can now make a submission. So if I wanted to make a submission under any of the chapters in the development plan, this is the consultation where we have open on the county development plan. You can see here that 12 submissions have already been received, and the planning development team will already be working and assessing those submissions. So again, it's a very good place for us to deal with the observations that are coming in relation to the development plan against specific objectives. So when you get in here again, you'll see that there's a video. I'm not going to play it now because it won't play very well in the webinar, but there's a YouTube video that talks about the process. And the key dates are included here on the first page. Again, Wednesday, the 23rd of February, as Damien has said earlier, is the key date, because that's the date that you have to make your submission or your observations by. Down the right-hand side here of the site, you can go in and drill into any of the chapters. So, you know, Damien might give us a run through of the chapters. If you want to make an observation in relation to public transport, for example, maybe that might be done under the connectivity chapter. So again, you can see that there is a chapter here, or a section within that chapter on public transport. You can read what it has to say, and that might be a resource that you'll want to make an observation on. So I'll give you an idea as to how you can go back and do that. So this is the chapter. If I just take a step back, I can make a submission. So we can see that 2 people have already made a submission in relation to this chapter. If I want to make a submission, I just click on my Make a Submission button, and the system will walk you through how you can make your submission. So it's very, very user-friendly. It's telling me that I should give the submission a title. So, for example, if I want to improve the public transport to a particular town, I type in the name of the town here. So I put in my public transport service to whatever, and then it'll bring me to my next question. Again, it gives you some basic information. You can have a cover letter or a cover note in relation to your submission and your observation. Then you can basically go in and select the chapter to which your observation applies. So it's volume 1, that's where these chapters are contained. It is in the connectivity chapter, and the topic I'm going to select here is public transport. And then I can put in my observations in relation to the public transport. If it was an example like I used earlier on in relation to maybe observations in relation to things that might be missing that are geographically constrained, or if you have an observation in relation to an area, there's an interactive map that you can use here. There's a kind of a window to that map within the web page, but if you wanted to zoom in and look the whole thing, you can click on the map header to go into full screen mode. So by double clicking here, I can zoom in. And when you're in here, you can, for example, if I want to raise issues to do with sand dunes in inch, I can go in here and I can draw the area that I'm concerned with. So there's a little drawing tool here that people can use. So it's not just the text. If you wanted to go in and highlight an area, or if you wanted to draw something, you can put a drawing in. So I can do it here now. So if I just wanted to highlight an area of sand dunes that I was concerned with, that forms part of my submission. Okay, and again, if I double click, it'll bring that back in, and that'll be saved. That marked up area will form part of your submission. You can save your submission and go back and review it then later on. If you have any attachments, so you might have some screenshots, you might have some notes, you might have a report that you're referring to where you feel that the county development plan maybe needs to be strengthened or needs to have regard to, and you can add your attachment within that window there. So there's a lot of I suppose scope to aid you making a submission and an observation on this plan. When you're finished, you save and review your plan. If you're not happy with what you've written, you can delete it. Now in this case, I left out some fields and the system is telling me that I'm missing some data, but that's because I didn't type in the cover letter. So again, the system will guide you through that process, and when your submission is made, the planning team will actually see that. So if I go back to the dashboard here and the 12 submissions, I can see as a member of the public the type of submissions that have been made by people already. Okay, so there's a summary of those submissions that have been made, and there's also the capacity to see from a dashboard point of view what are the areas that people have been making submissions on. So you can see here there's been some submissions made in relation to chapter 4. There's been more submissions made in relation to connectivity. So you'll get a sense as people are completing returns, what are the areas of interest to them, and obviously that's hugely beneficial to Damien, Mike, and the members of the planning development team who will be looking at these submissions. They can see what are the areas of interest to people who are making submissions as they go. So it's great for us to have those already classified and targeted. So that's the site. I hope you find it useful. and please spread the word and encourage people to make submissions. As Damien and Mike have both alluded to, this is really one of the most important documents that we engage the public on. While it's a matter of a reserved function, so it's a function for the councillors to adopt the county development plan. Certainly the public feedback is very much appreciated and welcomed by councillors and management alike within the council. So please do use that tool, and if you've got any feedback for us in relation to how you find that tool, that would be great, because the use of this tool itself is a digital pilot, and we'd certainly like to learn from that. And if you find it useful, or if you think it could be improved in certain ways, give us that feedback, as well as your feedback in relation to the county development plan. So thank you everybody for your time in joining us tonight. Thank you again to Damien and Mike and Lisa in particular. And we very much look forward to engaging with you between now and the close of business for submissions in February, and receiving your submissions and observations. So thank you very much, everybody.
Before you conclude, Brian, I just want to thank you for facilitating this tonight. You did a great job as usual, and I want to thank the very many people that have taken the time and the 2 hours plus that to view this proceeding. So I suppose make the 2 hours worthwhile by following it up with a submission. And again, thank you for taking part, and we appreciate your efforts. Take care.